Right, I think we're ready to roll. Good evening, everybody. The wonders of technology. Apologies for the delay. Welcome to this meeting of the Dacorum Borough Council's Development Management Committee. My name is Councillor Garrick Stevens and I'm chair of the committee. Our vice chair is Fiona Guest, who's sitting on the front desk down there. The other members of the committee in attendance at the meeting are Councillor Bromham, Councillor Link, Councillor Hobson, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Madden, and Councillor Anderson is standing in as a substitute for Councillor White-Low. On the front here, we've got Councillor Riddick, Councillor Walker, Councillor Durrant, and I said Councillor Guest. The officers in attendance is Philip Stanley, who's head of development management, Elspeth Palmer, who will be presenting the first item on the agenda, 5A, and Martin Strictly, who will be presenting on 5B and 5C. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, but if the fire alarm sounds, please make your way to the ground floor and assemble outside. If the meeting is extended, there may be a comfort break during this meeting at around 9 p.m. And before we start, please mute or turn off your mobile phones. We've got a few outstanding items on the agenda, minutes. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was held, I believe, on the 16th of October. The minutes have been circulated. Are they agreed? Thank you. I'll sign them after the meeting. Apologies for absence. The next item on the agenda is to receive any apologies for absence. We've had a late apology from Councillor Smith-Wright, who was going to stand in for Councillor Patterson. She's unwell. And I've mentioned the substitutes. Councillor Link is substituting for Councillor Tchaikovsky. Declarations of interest. The next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Please can I remind members to declare any disclosable pecuniary or other interests at the beginning of the relevant planning application. Any member who declares an interest will be allowed to stay in the meeting, but will not have the right to vote. I also want to remind members that only those present during the entire debate for an item are entitled to vote on it. On public participation, which is item 4, I'd like to remind members of the public about the rules regarding public participation. We have a number of members of the public who have registered to speak, and the list has been circulated. Our normal practice is to bring forward applications where a speaker is present. You will be invited to address the meeting when the item you have registered to speak is to be discussed. The normal procedure and rules in respect of times to speak will apply. The time per speaker is 3 minutes. Where more than one person is speaking on a planning application, the shared time is increased from 3 to 5 minutes. And the 5 minutes will be shared equally unless the sharing of time has been otherwise arranged prior to the meeting. Speakers in objection to the officer's recommendation are taken first. A timer will be displayed on the screen and times will be strictly enforced. Members of the public will not be entitled to take part in the discussion that follows the public speakers. And I have the discretion to remove any member of the public from the meeting if they interrupt, try to engage in the discussion, or are abusive. And for each application, the officer will present the report to the committee. Then the participants from the public are called to speak. Following this, questions are taken from the committee along with statements and comments for debate. There will be a formal vote among councillors which will represent the decisions of this committee. As I said, our normal procedure is to take applications where the speakers are attending. But in this particular case, item 5A, which is development at Chipperfield, Tower Hill, Chipperfield, was deferred from the last meeting, so we're taking that first. And the case officer is Elspeth Palmer. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The application...
Moment, we've got...
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to declare an interest in 5A and 5B because both of those applications fall within my ward. Now, I've had no contact with anybody on either of these, So I come with an open mind and will decide after the presentation. Thank you.
I wish to say the same. I am also a parish councillor of Bovingdon, and I've taken no part in any vote when it came to the parish council. So I wish to come with an open mind and wish to take my position to be able to vote. Thank you.
Chair, if I could just address the councillors, you need to ensure that you've come to the meeting with an open mind. Obviously, we can be challenged, and so you need to make sure that you're going to have debate and just have an open mind.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application is for demolition of existing agricultural buildings, construction of two two-bed dwellings and two three-bed dwellings, associated parking and landscaping. This application has been brought before the committee due to a previous refusal on this site for a scheme with a similar description. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, great. The site location plan shows the site edged in red with the other land owned by the applicant edged in blue. The site is on the southern side of Tower Hill, Chipperfield, approximately 700 metres from the village boundary and opposite the Boot public house. Next slide, please. An aerial view of the site and surrounding area. The site is to the left of the red marker you can see on Tower Hill. An existing site plan showing the listed buildings outlined in green and the buildings to be demolished outlined in blue. Next slide, please. Existing elevations of the dwellings on the site. Next slide, please. The existing elevations of the agricultural buildings on the site and additional elevations of the other agricultural buildings on the site. Proposed site plan for the current scheme and the previous application, just to show the differences between the two. The built form in the current scheme is more linear in nature, which is similar to the layout of the agricultural buildings, and the scheme is less parking dominated and has more landscaping towards the frontage of the proposed buildings. The creation of a pair of semi-detached dwellings rather than 4 suburban-looking detached dwellings has also reduced the overall appearance of the built form. Next slide, please. Now, I'd just like to run through the plans for the proposed dwellings and compare them with the plans for this scheme that was previously refused. So this shows the proposed front elevation for houses 1 and 2, compared with the front elevation of one of the detached houses previously proposed. Please note the linear barn-like form and design of the current scheme when compared with the more suburban, blocky appearance of the previous scheme. Next slide, please. The proposed rear elevation for houses 1 and 2 and the rear elevation of one of the houses previously proposed. Next slide, please. Side elevations compared with the previous scheme. Next slide. Now moving on to the proposal. These are the ground floor plans for houses 1 and 2, which are 3-bed. Next slide, please. And the proposed roof plan for houses 1 and 2, showing the carports to the side of each dwelling. Next slide. Proposed ground floor plans for houses 3 and 4, which are 2-bed dwellings. Next slide, please. Proposed roof plan for houses 3 and 4. And then the proposed double carport. Some site photographs, just to give you an idea of the surrounding character and the site itself. So these are views looking south from Tower Hill, showing the listed dwellings to the front of the site and the listed barn behind. Views closer to the site, showing the listed barn and the dwellings. A view looking north towards the site and the Boot Public House opposite. Views of the agricultural buildings from within the site, which are proposed to be demolished. Other agricultural buildings to be demolished. There are a number, and other buildings to be demolished. Views of more of the agricultural buildings from different angles within the site and from outside of the site. I'd just like to run through the green belt balance because this was presented with the previous scheme and I'd like to compare the two. It's agreed that the proposal is inappropriate development in the green belt, so the main assessment is whether the very special circumstances put forward outweigh the harm to the green belt and other harms resulting from the proposal. This slide shows the green belt balancing exercise for the previously refused application. The harms that have been crossed out with a line through are those which have been removed as a result of the amended plans. The VSC remain the same, but the harms which remain include that the scheme is inappropriate development in the green belt and that there will be a loss of agricultural buildings. It's therefore concluded on balance that the benefits in this case outweigh the harms. And it's recommended that the application be delegated with a view to approval, subject to the completion of a unilateral undertaking and an appropriate assessment to ensure mitigation of impacts on the Children's Beechwood Special Area of Conservation and the imposition of planning conditions set out within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Elspeth. Councillors, there aren't any speakers on this one from Chipperfield Parish Council, which withdrew its objections prior to this application coming forward. Comments? Any questions?
Regarding the loss of agricultural buildings, I wonder whether they are actually in use, and there is a fair amount of land around them. So when if these are demolished and converted to residences, will there just be more agricultural buildings erected, and thereby damaging the sort of green belt factor?
That was a concern with the previous scheme, but as part of this application, the applicant submitted a report that demonstrated the buildings haven't been used for some time and that the agricultural land can still be used without those buildings in place.
Just wondering how long some time is. You said that the agricultural buildings hadn't been used for some time. How long is that specifically? Thanks.
It does state that in the report that they've submitted, but from memory, it's at least 10 years.
Anybody else?
Chairman, the weighing up the balance, I mean, I would move the officer recommendation. You may want to park that because I see at least one other speaker.
Right, Councillor Madden.
I just want to really voice my concerns on this kind of application, really. I appreciate it. I have to say this is a lot better than the first one. I was very opposed to the first one. The contribution to housing supply on the first one, I most definitely didn't agree with, because the housing supply that we need is for smaller family housing, and they were all large detached dwellings, which are mostly unaffordable for people. So I do appreciate that these are much smaller. I'm still wrestling with the building in the Greenbelt. Where does it stop? So if you could go back to the balance, it's the balance one that really is the interesting one for me. Yeah, so I'm just talking out loud, thinking out loud, really. It's whether I think the contribution to housing supply outweighs the Greenbelt harm. And at the moment, I'm still thinking, I'd like to hear what other people think about it before I make a decision.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I may be suffering from a false memory here, or there may be two controversial sites in Tower Hill at the same time. But I could have sworn I read an appeal decision where the first one's been allowed on appeal. And all the reasons for it, and I read it through and I thought it was quite an interesting case and looked at the balances involved. Can the officers just really confirm whether I'm imagining things or whether the appeal really is outstanding?
There is an appeal outstanding on this site, and usually if appeals have been decided, the case officer does receive a copy fairly quickly, and I haven't received anything.
In which case, I'll just comment, I'll part that, Chair, and just make my 2 pennies worth comments in addition to colleagues. And this is the slide on the screen which I really wanted to address, because I can see the struggles that colleagues have, because certainly this isn't enough housing to talk about contributing to the housing supply, irrespective of the type. And improvements to the setting of the listed building, I'm not sure about in this case in terms of comparing before and after. But I do accept that there is improvements to the spatial, the openness of the Greenbelt, and also the appearance of the site. But I'm just wondering whether those two things are strong enough to constitute very special circumstances. It's a difficult one. It's right on the edge, in my opinion, because yes, it's Greenbelt, but at the end of the day, if you're actually getting an improvement, both of the Greenbelt and what's there, I think on the balance, one would have to err on the side of officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Any further contributions? If not, we've got a proposal to accept officer's recommendation from Councillor Guest. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Durrant, seconder. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour of officer's recommendation? So officer's recommendation is carried. Thank you. What did the number work out? 10-0-1. Right. Thanks, Elspeth. Oh, right. Thank you for your report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So just to draw members' attention to the addendum, there were several points just to highlight in terms of the Bovingdon Neighbourhood Plan and where that sat in the report, but also an updated response from Ecology. No objection from them. We've also had two further responses from Cadent Gas. The initial one was a holding objection, and the second response was no objection from them. And then finally, just to highlight that we've had some further detail provided from one of the neighbours, and that was a presentation that's in the addendum, but I think it's also been circulated as well. So turning to the application, just to highlight there are a couple of late items. So there's been an update to condition number 12. This was the visibility display condition, and it originally highlighted distances for the visibility displays. However, highways have come back and agreed that a temporary traffic management plan would be suitable. And in essence, the reason for this is to avoid as much vegetation being sort of removed for the visibility displays on one of the access points. And following that, the conditions have been reordered. There's also been a response from Buckinghamshire Council. So they raised no objection in relation to their consultation, and therefore the recommendation's been updated as on the screen. And just to highlight that the duty under Section 85 of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act has been considered. It talks about furthering AONB impacts in terms of sort of wildlife and access to the countryside and beauty. So whilst not explicitly mentioned in the report, just to highlight that that has been considered. And finally, we've included an additional condition just for all the materials for all of the items of infrastructure. So most of them have got materials located on them on the plans, but this allows us to secure details on those elements. So just taking a look at the site location plan. So the application site is 56 hectares approximately in size, and it's split into two different parcels. The eastern parcel is around 16 hectares in size, and the remaining 40 or so hectares is on the western side. There's woodland buffers around the western and southern side, and there's a number of residential properties that you can see located in orange. There are also some agricultural buildings and listed buildings in the centre of the site between the two red lines. Having a look at the wider context, this is where the site sits in comparison to Bovingdon to the northeast and Leyhill to the southwest. And just to flag that a number of cumulative projects, including the Bovingdon Airfield Studios, LA6, Grange Farm, and the Bovingdon Brickworks applications have been taken into account as part of the assessment. So just taking a look at site selection. So there's not a policy requirement for a local planning authority to consider different sites. However, the application has been provided with a site selection document that's looked at a 3-kilometre study area from Lye Green to Watford substations. The reason why this study area has been looked at is to do with the amount of infrastructure that's required and the number of sort of underground cables that would be required. So extending beyond that study area is deemed too disruptive to sort of the environment. And just looking at the range of constraints that were looked at as part of the wider site selection document, the local planning authority's conclusion is that these other sites that have been considered are no less constrained than the application site. So just having a look at public rights of way around the site, you've got Bovingdon 09, which is down Pocketsdale Lane, and that runs across the top of the western parcel. You've got LAT 82 on the western edge, and that's part of the Chilterns Heritage Trail that leads to further footpaths to the south. And then you've got Bovingdon 06 that cuts through the eastern parcel. In terms of topography, the application site is primarily on a plateau, which then dips down into the Middle Chess Valley on the western and southern boundaries, as shown on the drawing. So just looking at some of the case officer's photographs, this just shows the western parcel and the access point, which is a field gate, with Shantok Lane to the left. And then just looking back the other way, the access point is just in front of the post box in that image. This is the western parcel, so the most northern parcel on the western parcel. looking towards Pocketsdale Lane, and then moving and looking directly at Pocketsdale Lane in that parcel, and then just turning around and looking back towards Leyhill Road. This is some photographs showing some of the gaps on Pocketsdale Lane. So I tried to put the sort of worst case photos in my presentation just to show that there are some gaps when looking out of the site. And then this is looking back in from Pocketsdale Lane and showing the gaps in the vegetation there. My photographs were primarily in sort of autumn and winter time. As part of the application, some further mitigation has been proposed, including willow hurdle fencing. So there's a lot of landscaping proposals with hedgerow planting, but we appreciate that that's not an instant sort of barrier. So on certain footpaths, Pocketsdale Lane and footpath 06, we have proposed to include willow hurdle fencing to provide a more sort of rural aesthetic and block those views immediately. So this is just moving into the western parcel and looking south towards Leyhill. And on the right-hand side, there's the footpath, the heritage trail I talked about down in the woodland. And then this is looking from the northern corner back towards the site from that footpath. Moving down the site and moving towards the site boundary, slightly off the footpath. The proposed solar panels would be beyond the ridge, and you can see part of the hedgerow there that would be grown up. So from this view, the panels would be obscured from view. And then moving further down that footpath, you can see there's some existing more mature vegetation that would help to screen the solar panels and other parts of the development. This is on the southern boundary, looking north towards Bovingdon. Again, there's existing screening there, but there are proposals to provide further screening. So for example, on the right-hand side image, there is a proposal for approximately 30 metres of scrub and tree planting in that location to screen. And then this is looking from the middle of the western parcel towards Leyhill Golf Club, and the Chilterns AONB is on the left-hand side of that image in the distance. And then turning around and looking towards Leyhill, and you can see there's a number of residential properties on the left-hand side of the image there. So this is the dip coming out of Bovingdon towards Leyhill. This is one of the more visual, one of the areas that be more visually prominent, and I'll show you the images of the CGIs shortly. And this shows approximately where the permissive path location is proposed. So as part of the proposals, there would be a connection that goes into the site to get people off Leyhill Road. This is just showing Leyhill Road and looking back towards the site and the existing hedgerow that's there. This is a view from the Chilterns National Landscape, and I've circled the area that would be visible of the site. And then this is showing the eastern access to the smaller parcel. And then going into the site and looking towards Maple Cottages. Turning back around, looking towards Puds Cross Farmhouse. Moving into the site and looking northwest. Looking southeast from that middle of that site. And then moving down footpath 06, which runs through the site. And then looking from that footpath towards Maple Cottages. And then just a view of Shantock Lane and the hedgerow that exists there. So I visited a number of residential properties, and I've just given a view from some of their first floor windows here to give an idea. On the left-hand side there, it's Herlock House. The temporary construction compound would be located approximately behind that tree on the right-hand side of that image. And in the distance, can't really see it, but on the image, there is some pylons, and there would be solar panels located behind that line of existing overhead lines. And there's a view again from Maple Cottages here, first floor looking towards the site. These photos were taken in October, so appreciate they may be less lethal in winter. More lethal, sorry. And then just looking from Mayfield Cottages, this is looking towards the temporary construction compound on the site. And Homefield Lodge, again, there's a deciduous tree there, so the panels will be more visible during the winter months, although the proposals are to increase the hedgerows to 3 to 4 metres to help mask. So just looking at the proposed development, so there are a number of fields of solar panels which have security fencing around them and cameras. There's access tracks that lead off Leyhill Road. You can see the western access is here, and the eastern access is here. The main compound is located here with all of the ancillary infrastructure. And there are a number of PV inverters that convert the electricity located within the individual fields. There are comprehensive landscaping proposals that will be secured through various conditions, but you can see the lines of hedgerows and woodland planting around the site. So just taking a look at the eastern parcel in a bit more detail, there's a bit of a rendering issue with the plan, so that's why some solar panels are darker than others, but that's what it looks like. You can see the 3 inverters in the middle. There is a BPA pipeline that runs through the site, and we are waiting to hear from them. However, like normal utility providers, it's to do with buffer distances and easements. Looking at the northern parcel, you can see 3 inverters located there, and there is a gas main that also runs around the side of the site and the pipeline coming through. And then just looking at this, the western parcel, but in the south, and you can see the main compound there that holds the sort of taller infrastructure. I think the highest part of that is around 8.3 metres in height. The connection point to the grid is down here, which is this yellow and green blob, and the cabling associated with it. And there's the compound that I talked about earlier, the construction compound, and the residence properties that I took the images from. So the construction period would be approximately 8 to 9 months. And this is just looking closely at the compound. It's worth noting that there is a fire hydrant located here in terms of fire safety. So this just shows the main DNO compound, which was located in the middle of that parcel. And this is the highest part. So I said 8.3, which is the tallest part of the development. Looking at the private switchgear and switch room, so more infrastructure within those compounds. These are lower in height, so 3.2 metres or so. Looking at the best inverter station, so this battery operation inverter system and the storage system is to obtain electricity and then let it flow back out to the grid in times of peak demand. And then just some of the other infrastructure that's associated with the compound. And further infrastructure, again, just different containers that are to do with spares and welfare and communications, etc. So this is the mounting system. So the panels would be 2.8 metres in height. And you can see galvanised steel and the PV modules on top, but we do have a condition regarding the materials. And then this is the inverter station. So these are the 9 inverters that are located in the middle of each field. Fencing and CCTV, so the security fencing is proposed to be 2.2 metres in height. As you can see, there is a section at the bottom showing kind of views from behind the hedgerows and the distance between the fencing. There's been some field margin buffers proposed for ecological purposes as well. And then the CCTV, the poles are 4.5 metres in height. There is a security measures strategy condition that we're requesting. So they have provided sort of worst case scenario in terms of all the cameras, but we'll get that finalised detail as part of the condition should the application be approved. So just turning to my assessment and grey belt. So the grey belt definition within the MPPF highlights that for land to be grey belt, it should not strongly contribute to purposes A, B or D. And as per the report, purpose A does not relate to villages, purpose B does not relate to villages, and purpose D does not relate to villages. And this was clarified in the National Planning Practice Guidance that was released in February 2025 this year. So it cannot be said that A, B, or D relate to Bovingdon or Leyhill because they are villages. The second part of the definition talks about footnote 7 and strong reasons for refusing the development. And the ones that I've identified as potential assets or areas are flood risk, Chilterns AONB, and as per my report, I've not found a strong reason for refusal in relation to any of them, and that relates to heritage as well. Just looking at locational sustainability, which is a requirement of Grey Belt. So paragraph 155C requires a development to be in a sustainable location. And I've pulled this appeal from January 2025. It's a solar farm in a similar rural location. And the inspector concluded that, in essence, due to the limited number of private cars or cars that would need to access the development in operational phase, rural locations can be deemed sustainable for solar farms. So just having a look at the landscape and visual impact assessment. So the site sits in two landscape character areas, which I touched on earlier, the Bovingdon and Chipperfield Plateau, and then we've got it dipping down into the Middle Chess Valley. And these were the viewpoints agreed between the LPA, the LPA's landscape consultant and the applicant before the application was submitted. And as you can see, we looked at a range of viewpoints adjacent to the site, but also further afield. You can see the zone of theoretical visibility in orange and red, so where the application site could be seen from, in theory. And the location I showed from the AONB earlier can be seen here at viewpoint 9 to the south. And this is just a representation of footpath 06 with the landscaping proposals once they've matured in relation to the panels. So just looking at a few CGIs, this is from footpath 06. So you can see at year 1, before the landscaping matures, you can see the solar panels, maple cottages, similar photo to the one I showed earlier on the left-hand side. And then at year 15, once that planting has established, it's worth noting that additional trees have been added in some areas to do with screening for neighbouring residents. There would be dotted trees in the hedgerow. This is from the western access point, and you can see, again, the solar panels are visible in the distance, and then at year 15, once the screening matures. And this is from the dip, so this is one of the most prominent areas that you can see the solar panels from. And then once the screening matures, it's worth pointing out that the red area, which is quite hard to see on this big screen, but that relates to the DNO substation and compound. So that's broadly masked in this location. And then similar to the photo I showed earlier, this is the visualization of years 1 and 15 from the Chilterns National Landscape, which can be seen here on the plan. And then you can see the red area behind the trees. So in terms of access and visibility displays, this has been looked at by the Hertfordshire Highway Authority. They've not raised any concerns with the access arrangements. They have looked at larger vehicles accessing, turning around and leaving the site. No specific concerns, subject to a number of conditions they've raised. In terms of construction traffic, this is proposed to come from Hemel Hempstead Way to avoid going on more rural lanes to the west, but also connection to the main highway network. And then just a few drawings here showing how construction vehicles and larger vehicles accessing the site will be able to turn around and leave. So just in terms of the highway's implications, so both of the access points were assessed in terms of the average traffic, and you can see the baseline number of vehicles in the bottom right-hand side. So the average annual daily flows for HGVs is 86 along the road, 1,635 for all vehicles. And the construction would have an average of 6 HGVs per day and 38 vehicles in total for the application. So that's a sort of 5 to 6% increase in terms of that. Obviously, that's based on an average daily flow, so that could be higher on one day or lower on another, but that's the average overall. So the conclusion from the Highway Authority and the Local Planning Authority is that low percentage of increased traffic isn't significant. This This site, this plan shows the footpath that's being proposed. So the photograph I showed earlier, connecting from Leyhill Road and going all the way up the site, connecting by Maple Cottages here. There is a condition that would secure that for the lifetime of the development. And then looking at noise. So these are the residential receptors that were taken into consideration as the noise impact assessment. So there are properties within close proximity but further away, but they've all been considered. The overall conclusions were that all of the properties would have noise impacts that are lower than the ambient noise levels in the area. So there was only 2 properties that went above this during 2 hours per day. And that was a 1 decibel increase above ambient levels, which is generally imperceivable by the human ear. So this has been looked at by the environmental health team, and they've raised no concerns. We have added an additional condition just to make sure that the mitigation strategy is put in place, and also set a noise limit for the various bits of infrastructure on the site that do generate noise. So that would be something that could be enforced by the environmental health team should that decibel limit be in breach of the condition and approved documents. We've also had a look at footpaths around the site. So the specific assessment on footpaths wasn't in the noise assessment, but I've looked at this in relation to their assessment. And in essence, the impacts are very limited on the walking routes. Our rights of way officer hasn't raised any concerns. Just to give an idea of the noise on the Chilterns Heritage Trail, I've highlighted just the noise that would be heard there from the receptor, and that's actually around the same noise as the ambient noise levels as well, so probably imperceivable from that footpath. So having a look at agricultural land now, so we've had 2 agricultural land classification documents submitted to the council. This was the sample locations from the first. Part of the site was ruled out from being high quality agricultural land due to the gradient, which you can see in the green and yellow. So that is automatically, due to that gradient, reduced in the level. And then we had a further assessment provided to the council, and it shows that there is 6.4 hectares, which is approximately 11% of the site, is subgrade 3A, which is best and most versatile land, which you can see in dark green there. It's worth pointing out that both of the assessments highlighted issues with wetness and how wet the soil is, which can impact germination and growth of plants, etc. So there is a small area of BMV when considering the whole site, but in terms of assessing that as a planning authority, Natural England usually raise concerns with anything over 20 hectares, but this harm has been weighed in the balance, although it is considered to be temporary over 40 years. Flood risk and drainage. The application site's in flood zone 1, i.e. the lowest risk of flooding. There are small pockets of surface water flooding on the site. And this is a proposed drainage scheme. Now, we do have a concern raised by the LLFA, but they've raised 4 conditions that would help to overcome that concern. It's worth pointing out that the LLFA are looking for an improvement in runoff rates, because it's part of a major development. And it's worth highlighting that the actual impermeable material on the site is less than 1% of the site, because solar panels, although the water hits the top of them, it just then drains into the soil beneath, but that is being conditioned. In terms of flood risk, drainage and fire safety, the battery system is the key bit to look at in terms of fire safety. There are impermeable sort of trenches beneath them and materials to ensure that should they set on fire, there won't be any leach of contaminants into the ground, and that can be seen in this drawing. And just going on from that, we've had no concerns raised by the fire safety team at Herts County. An outline battery management safety plan has been provided, and a detailed one would be conditioned as part of any planning approval. And as I pointed out earlier, there is a fire hydrant location. The applicants confirmed that discussions with Affinity Water have confirmed the in-principle agreement to that location and the amount of litres per minute that can be produced there. Turning to glint-and-glare, so as part of the assessment, a glint-and-glare study has been provided. Some glint-and-glare issues were identified, and you can see in the location on the top right-hand side of the screen, due to the lower hedgerow and that there. So the proposals would need to combat that issue, and that can be captured through a glint and glare study and mitigation proposals, which would likely include early planting and additional planting. There's also been glint and glare looked at in terms of residential properties. Some of the properties in their first floor windows would have a limited amount of glint and glare. I think the maximum was about 60 minutes a day during summer months. That's obviously weighed into the residential amenity harm that's been identified. In terms of aviation, we've had responses from the MOD, Civil Aviation Authority, and National Air Traffic Services, and they've not raised any concerns in terms of aviation. Built heritage, there are 2 assets that I talked about earlier between the sites. Less than substantial harm on the lower end of the scales being identified by the heritage officer in relation to the setting of these assets, which is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal. There are a number of assets further away, but no harm was identified. Archaeology, some assets were found, but these would be dealt with via condition. Trees and vegetation, so there'd be a bit of removal on the site, including a group of conifers, cherry tree, and some hedgerow removals to facilitate sort of the access track, etc. There's been no specific concerns from the Trees and Woodland Officer, and some recommendations have been proposed in terms of ash dieback and the way to manage that in the future. So these have been incorporated into the conditions proposed. And just looking at ecology, the ecologist at Herts County generally said that the habitats on site were kind of a low value, being agricultural land, but there were habitats identified. No fundamental objections from the ecology department, subject to conditions. And the applicant is proposing a high level of BNG increase, roughly 100% or 92% for the habitat units, and around 22% for hedgerow units, which is proposed in their biodiversity plan. The local planning authority feels it can only insist on the mandatory requirement of 10%, but this is being put forward by the applicant. So an economic statement has been provided with the predicted economic benefits, and as I highlighted in my report, this is a snapshot in time, and just this provides on screen what would be provided in the current day and age of this application. It's worth pointing out in my report, slight typo, I meant to say 5 full-time jobs. I think I said give full-time jobs, but it was meant to be 5 full-time jobs would be associated with the application. So just looking at the planning balance, so the weighing table, substantial weight is given to the energy production. It's worth highlighting that the proposal would provide enough energy for 8,604 homes, and that's based on average energy usage per house. There's also other economic benefits, social benefits associated with the job creation, the construction, and farm diversification. It's worth pointing out, and I've mentioned in my report, that the farmer has suggested that he would still graze under the panels, and that could be incorporated into the BNG management plan. Permissive footpath is being proposed, and limited weight is being given to that in terms of pedestrian safety and the improved access to the countryside. And then, as I discussed earlier, heritage harm that needs to be given great weight as per the NPPF. Landscape and visual impacts, moderate, obviously more impactful at the beginning, but reducing over time. Residential amenity due to the glare issues. I say it's worth pointing out that obviously the right to a view is not a planning consideration that can be taken into account. And then the loss of agricultural land is given negligible weight. The application is therefore recommended for approval when taking into consideration the tilted balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Right, we have some speakers. Claire Williams and Keely London. You've got 5 minutes between you.
You've got to press the button. Good button.
Right-hand button of the speaker in front of you.
I'm speaking on behalf of many of the residents of Puds Cross who will be adversely affected by this development.
Approval of this application will be setting significant precedents, not only for all villages in Dacorum, but also nationally, both on the definition of grey belt and on the acceptable proximity of a solar plant to residences. You need to be certain about three things: that this is grey belt land, that it is an acceptable development so close to our houses, and that the tilted balance conclusions are valid. The SKM review used to justify the grey belt assessment does not look beyond the Hertfordshire boundary and fails to acknowledge Bovingdon's proximity to Chesham in Buckinghamshire. You can see on image 1 I provided that the green belt around Bovingdon plays a strategic role in preventing Hemel merging with Chesham, thus meeting purpose B of the green belt. The application site provides Dacorum's last buffer of green belt along the southwestern county boundary. The classification of this land has been changed from definitely green belt in June to grey belt in September. Many consultees responded on the basis that the land was green belt and do not appear to have been reconsulted. You can see from image 2 that the development surrounds the properties in Puds Cross, with many of them overlooking the site. Some houses are just 15.5 metres away from security fencing. That's the length of 3.5 cars. Moreover, this is not an installation blending into the countryside. To quote the report, the infrastructure, which you can see in image 3, would change the landscape and rural nature of the area. We chose to live amongst the beauty and tranquility of the countryside, not next door to an industrial plant. All the mitigations within the report are hypothetical. The predicted noise levels in the report are computer generated, and hedges will take 15 to 20 years to grow before becoming effective screening. The construction phase will be intolerable, with the constant noise of pile drivers affecting our physical and mental health. There have been numerous issues and omissions with the information that we have been provided by the applicant. In image 4, you can see that solar panels were sneakily added back in closer to the rear of Maple Cottages after the closing date of the consultation. We had to challenge the developer's soils classification, which eventually turned out to be incorrect. As regards the tilted balance, despite no permanent local employment being created, as everything is remotely monitored, and there being no land left at Marchant's Farm to diversify, the benefits are considered substantial. Whereas, despite the report stating that the proposals would fundamentally change the character of the site, the harm to the landscape and visual impact is considered just moderate, and most shockingly, the impact on our residential amenity is considered no more than limited. Thank you. Over to Keely.
Amenity at Puds Cross means views offering peace, silence of night skies, the sound of our wildlife, our open footpaths across these fields which let us breathe and are essential for our well-being. It's why we all live here and most work from home. Glare, metal and noise would invade our daily lives. The Equality Act 2010 states that the council must protect residents with hidden disabilities, neurodiversity, anxiety disorders and depression. For these members in our community, this landscape is what keeps them well and stops sensory overwhelm. Take that away and you take away their sanctuary, their well-being and their sense of safety. Sir Patrick Abercrombie first influenced the Greenbelt to preserve rural character and provide space for recreation and nature. That vision lives here in Puds Cross, and it is vital that we continue to protect it by not turning it into an industrial cage. Our protected wildlife, bats, owls, skylark, deer, newts, are already being pushed out by large developments nearby. These plans displace, not protect. The claimed biodiversity gains are a facade, with hedges only added to mask the harm. Planners are leaving the best fire safety to the applicants, and this is all above a protected aquifer. These sites create no local jobs, there is no benefit for the community, and there's no compensation for the residents. The mitigation that was once offered was retracted after the consultation closed. We will all have immediate views of panels and a huge substation, claustrophobic and suffocating, in my child's own words. Yes, renewable targets do need to be met, but on roofs, on motorways, on brownfield sites, not greenbelt and not productive farmland. True sustainability means protecting the landscape that sustains us. This proposal destroys our local amenity, which fails every basic planning test. So the planning balance is very clearly ticked for refusing permission. Doing the right thing is not always easy,
Time's
but
up.
refusing this industrialisation of our green belt is the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. And we have two speakers in support of the application. Jay Sadderson, sorry about that, and Laura Fogarty. Over to you. 5 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of our application. My name is Laura Fogarty and I'm the Planning Manager at British Solar Renewables. British Solar Renewables is a proudly British company based in the Southwest. Our mission is to create renewable energy that has a positive impact upon people and the planet. The purpose of our projects is to provide a clean, renewable source of electricity to the national grid, supporting the UK's growing energy needs while contributing to national and local net zero ambitions. Through our work, we aim to not only support the energy transition, but also bring long-term social, environmental, and economic benefits to the communities that host our projects. Benefits that are designed to extend long after the 40-year operational lifespan of our solar parks. This same approach has guided this proposal, which has been carefully designed to deliver reliable, renewable energy whilst making a positive and lasting contribution to the local area. To date, BSR has successfully developed and built over 918 megawatts of solar capacity across the UK, making us one of the leading contributors to the country's renewable energy sector. In developing this proposal, we have worked collaboratively with the case officer, consultees, and the community to ensure that the project is thoughtfully designed and can deliver a lasting positive impact, both locally and nationally. I'll now hand over to Jay Sagerston, our planning consultant, who will talk you through the details of our proposal. Thank you.
Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Dacorum Council has declared a climate emergency. The Council's own climate strategy sets an objective to become net zero as quickly as possible by increasing the amount of renewable energy produced in the borough. This scheme directly supports this objective by powering just over 8,500 homes a year, saving around 7,500 tonnes of CO2 annually. With the battery system, the scheme helps regulate the grid, prevent blackouts, and reduce electricity shortages. And despite nationwide difficulties in securing grid connections, this site benefits from an on-site point of connection. Following an extensive public consultation process and through continued engagement with the case officer, this application has no substantive outstanding objections from the relevant statutory technical consultees. The final layout has carefully responded to feedback and reflects a balanced, well-planned and policy-compliant design. Importantly, the development features extensive landscaping proposals and would not cause significant harm to the character of the surrounding area, including the Chilterns National Landscape. Being located on grey belt land, it would not be inappropriate in the green belt, even if considered otherwise. Very special circumstances exist to justify consent. There will be no significant highway safety impacts during construction or operation, and there will be no significant detrimental amenity impacts by way of noise, overshadowing, or overbearing. There will be no permanent or significant loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, and no significant ecological harm has been identified, with a substantial combined biodiversity net gain of over 110%. The recreational and amenity value of public rights of way would not be significantly impacted, with a new permissive footpath improving rural connectivity overall. Finally, there'd be no detrimental impact with regards to flood risk, heritage, archaeology, glint and glare, fire risk, contamination, or health and safety. As set out in the committee report, the scheme delivers substantial economic, social, and environmental benefits, with national planning policy stating that as a bare minimum, significant weight must be afforded to renewable energy. Considering the significantly limited amount of utility-scale renewable energy infrastructure in the borough, approving this application demonstrates Dacorum's commitment to tackling climate change through decisive and practical action in line with their own climate strategy. Therefore, I respectfully ask members to grant permission subject to the planning conditions outlined in the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, members. Comments? Questions of the officer? Over to you. Councillor Bromwell.
Is there a community benefit fund of £116,000, and what sort of things could that be used for?
That's correct, yeah. So as part of the planning process, we wouldn't secure that legally through the planning process because it's felt that the weighting and what's being provided is not necessary, and generally those financial sums aren't secured through the planning system. But yes, the applicant is proposing that money, and there would be an agreement with Bovingdon Parish Council or other local groups regarding how that money could be spent. It could be on community projects. It could be to do with education. That's really for negotiation between the relevant parties.
Councillor Madden, and then Councillor Guest.
Thank you. I actually think I've answered my own question. I'd forgotten what it said in about glint and glare with the dwellings, but I've actually just found it in the report. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the case officer, have any solar farms been refused anywhere across the country? And if so, were they appealed? And if appealed, what were the outcomes of the appeals?
So since I got this application about a year ago almost now, or some time ago, I've been looking at appeals coming through. Seems like the government's approach to appeals, a lot of them are being allowed at the moment. I think the government's push towards grey belt and getting housing and renewable energy systems off the ground. Yeah, every case needs to be looked at it on its own merits, but yeah, the general trend I've seen from appeals has been for approval.
Councillor Guest, do you have a follow-up? Not.
No, I don't.
Councillor Darrell.
Yeah, Martin, thank you. You mentioned earlier on the life of the development. What does that exactly mean? Does it have a life?
Yeah, so the operational life would be 40 years. After that time, we've got several conditions regarding the decommissioning of the site. So I think it's 6 months or so before the 40-year limit time limit runs out. They'd have to provide a decommissioning scheme regarding the removal of the apparatus from the site.
If I can just come back.
Gerald.
Thank you. If that was the case, what would happen afterwards? Would it go back to agricultural land, or would it just be classed and it could be used for housing?
So the condition specifically says that the land shall be returned to its former state.
Councillor Patton.
I do have a question this time. I'm interested in the fact that if this is considered green belt, grey belt, sorry, and this solar farm doesn't go ahead for whatever reason, whether it gets refused or whatever, if it's deemed grey belt, is there a possibility that we could see a planning application coming in the future for housing? And if so, how many houses would you put on that, and which would be worse?
That's a hard one to answer. The reason why I've considered this to be grey belt on this application, there's the link to sustainability. So in theory, if a housing development came forward and provided enough improvements to sort of highway network, the bus infrastructure, etc., footpath cycleways into Bovingdon, an assessment at that time would need to be made as to whether that's made the site sustainable enough to meet that relevant part of the MPPF. So theoretically, something could be proposed. But in terms of this location and the current proposal, the use is considered sustainable without those highway requirements because of the very low number of vehicles that would come through the operational phase.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I hasten to add 40 years' time, that won't be my problem. However, my concern here is the change from grey belt to green belt, whether it be a solar farm, housing, whatever. I'm not comfortable with the reasons we've got, how we can change it. My concerns are that if we do this tonight in this room, this lays open a whole swathe of any field in Dacorum that could suddenly be justifiable to be developed. The concern I also have is that it wasn't many weeks ago when we were in this very chamber discussing a barn in Fithston, which was a very old barn, it was dilapidated, to be turned into a one-bedroom dwelling. And we sat here for an hour talking about the views and light pollution. Eventually it was turned down. Then we struggled to find the reasons under planning why we could justify to turn it down. And then it came back and I think it's now been passed, I forget. But long and short of it is that was one building. This is 145 acres, I think if my maths is correct, which, however we dress it up, we are changing the use of greenbelt. In the report, it says it's greenbelt. And to suddenly say now it's greybelt, I know government is pushing for housing, and I thought greybelt was introduced for housing, not necessarily for this. And if you look at the definitions, we all read it, it says car parks, improvements of land, whatever. This isn't it. This is greenbelt, and I think it should remain as greenbelt. But I know this isn't a question, but I've all got to say, Martin, that we have to be absolutely spot on with this, because if we're not, it's not just Bovingdon with a solar farm, it's the whole of Dacorum could change tonight. Thank you.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the concerns. I think the government have shaken up planning policy big time with the introduction of greybelt, and I think we may see a lot of expansion around villages of housing and all sorts of other development because they've specifically said the villages aren't applicable to when you're looking at the purposes. So I think that's a central government direction that is obviously affecting local communities, but that is something they've chosen to do. With reference to the other application that's being considered, obviously we look at other applications on their own merits, but what I would say on this one in particular is there's been year-long or longer than a year discussions on the landscape and visual proposals and the way that all the landscaping can tie together to make this scheme acceptable on the landscape and visual impact side of things. So whilst a barn or a smaller application may not have had all that other work to actually soften the development, this has, so I'd just highlight that. And I appreciate the discussion on housing and the government introducing greybelt for that purpose, but it doesn't specifically, there is an element to greybelt that relates to housing, but it also opens it up to other things like solar generation. And I would just highlight the national targets. So by 2030, the government want 45 to 57 gigawatts of power. We're currently, since May 2025, we were on 19 gigawatts. So that's a substantial increase considering that this site alone is just 22 megawatts, not even a gigawatt. And the proposals of government are then to increase that fivefold to increase to 70 gigawatts by 2035. So there is going to be a lot of areas that are going to require solar panels. I appreciate greenbelt, preferably not, but Dacorum is 60% greenbelt. So we are really hamstrung with our designations when these proposals come forward.
Before we move on, in fact, Martin has set out the planning issues in paragraphs 9.47. So that's the planning issue here. Councillor Riddick and then Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very concerned that this is green belt. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And how we can try and dress it up as so-called grey belt is beyond belief. Now, according to the Dacorum Borough Council's Stage 3 Greenbelt Review, dated the 27th of August 2020, prepared by Arup Consultants, it shows that this particular site is green belt, nothing else. So why we're having to try and persuade people that it is something different to what it is, I do not know. In the report, on page 69 and 9.41, it states, the application site is situated within the green belt. The proposed development does not qualify for any of the exceptions listed within paragraph 154 of the MPPA. So that's a complete conflict with the presentation we've had. This is very valuable agricultural land. Page 71, 9.58, it confirms it's grade 2 land, which is very good quality land, and grade 3A land, which is good quality land. We cannot afford to lose this type of land. Also, on page 82, there has been attention drawn to the possibility of asbestos contamination because of the historical use in the vicinity. Because this was a very major Air Force site, first of all during the Second World War and afterwards when the RAF were there. So there were a lot of support facilities scattered around the airfield, and there's some doubt as to everything has been cleared away. In fact, some of it's probably been buried, which makes it even worse. Now, on page 104, we had the public consultation. Bovingdon Parish Council, Flamstead Parish Council, and Chipperfield Parish Council all object. In addition, there are 134 individual objections. We cannot ignore that. We must not. Let's talk about possible benefits. I see no benefits to this whatsoever. Because on page 106 and 9.293, we're not even going to get sill out of this development. So there's nothing for the local community whatsoever. And the other major issue, as far as I'm concerned, is the air traffic control system there, which is right next door. It's a major control facility. It's the northwest stack point for Heathrow. Not only for Heathrow, but it's also a major navigation point for light aircraft, helicopters, which are constantly going over there all day and every day. Now, there was a similar application at Aldenham, and that was next to Elstree Aerodrome. And that was refused because of the danger. And the appeal that was subsequently put forward was dismissed. Now, on page 190 here, the National Air Transport Systems, they say it conflicts with their safety criteria. And it says there are serious safety risks. So on that basis alone, I would not support this application at all. I think it would be an absolute travesty, as my colleague has just said as well. If this is given approval tonight, will have just lost all the green belt within Dacorum, because it will be up for grabs for all sorts of development. So I'm afraid I cannot support this, Chair. Thank you.
Philip, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to come back. There's obviously been a couple of comments in respect of green belt versus grey belt. as if it's a choice, the quorum can decide whether it's grey belt or green belt. The grey belt definition is within the MPPF, and it's defined as land in the green belt. So grey belt can be in the green belt; it can be one and the same thing, comprising previously developed land and/or any other land that does not strongly contribute to any purpose of A, B, or D in paragraph 143. And as Martin's presentation and report highlights, those paragraphs A, B, and D are not applicable to villages. So I appreciate that the definition of grey belt feels imposed, but it is, in officer's view, this is a grey belt site because the purposes A, B, and D are not applicable to villages. So this is a grey belt site within the green belt.
Thank you, Philip. Martin, there were some other comments that Councillor Riddick was making. Do you want to pick up on them?
Yeah, if I may, thank you. Just to point out, there was reference to the stage 3 green belt assessment. Just to highlight that the latest MPPF with grey belt and the MPPG both came out after that. So as Phil said, there's that layering approach. This site is still green belt, but there's the grey belt introduction, which layers on top of that. And I've been at inquiries and discussed this at great length. That is how it works. In terms of, there's a separation between lovely countryside, which I agree around the site, it is lovely countryside, and there would be visual and landscape impacts on the site. But this is completely separate from the grey belt and what the government have put in the MPPF and the MPPG, which is on the screen now. Just in terms of the contamination, there was a point raised on underground assets associated with the Bovingdon airfield. That has been considered, and in the report I do highlight that that's been flagged to the environmental health team, because when I met one of the residents, they highlighted the Nissan huts and all the asbestos in those buildings. So our environmental health team are specifically aware of that issue. Just in terms of the SIL point that was raised, I appreciate money wouldn't be collected through SIL, but the government and in various case law decisions have highlighted that it doesn't have to be localised benefits for a planning application and to be given weight in relation to those benefits. And then just finally, there was a sort of a quote from, I think it was from the Civil Aviation Authority, but there was a further response from them that said, now we've spoken to NATS, or NATS spoke to the CAA, they removed their objection. So just to highlight that issue was resolved during the course of the application.
Thank you for that. I thought it had been cleared. We've got Councillor Hobson and Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I have to admit, I'm really torn. In normal circumstances, I would jump to say yes to solar panels. I agree with all of the comments about the climate emergency and the need, and that this would provide a lot of green energy to the surrounding areas, although not necessarily to the people living. The reason I'm torn is not the grey belt, green belt. I think that's it's a red herring. It's a red herring because of the bad way that the legislation is written. It's a green belt we think of as something as beautiful, as the officer said, and protected, but it seems the government is really talking about land between big conurbations, like between Hemel and Hempstead, for example. I think that's kind of what it's aimed at, which means villages are kind of left a bit exposed. So the reason I'm torn on this is that, to me, I'm probably in the minority in this room. Those fields filled with, or not those specific fields, but fields filled with solar panels are actually a beautiful thing. To me, we didn't really see pylons years ago when we had that, and we much rather have electricity and pylons than have no electricity. But looking at this location, I do really feel for the villagers and the people living there, because it really does feel that they're very, very hemmed in. And so genuinely, I'm torn. I'm also torn because we have to look at this pseudo-legislatively and have very strong reasons for turning something down, because we do risk it being overturned on appeal, and the council would then potentially be liable to to fees and fine, and not fines, to pay for costs and things. So we do have to take this very seriously and use our head as much as we would love to just use our hearts. My one question really is, in the local plan, which is going through its last approval stages at government, have we identified, and apologies for me not looking at this beforehand because the thought only occurred to me as I was listening to the discussion, but have we identified any areas in Dacorum for sites such as this where it might be more appropriate? Because I know we focused on housing, and that's really what I was looking at when I was first looking at the local plan. So apologies if it's clear and I should have been able to pick this up easily, but do we have allocated sites for this kind of development that is much needed if we are to have a sustainable future for generations to come? Thank you.
I don't believe there's been any allocated sites for standalone renewable energy projects in the emerging plan.
Thank you, Chair. I have the benefit or lack of benefit, disbenefit, whatever the word I mean, of knowing this part of the world extremely well. I've been a local resident nearby for over 50 years, and I know the site very well. I fully understand where the residents are coming from. I certainly would be feeling the same if I was in their shoes. But with the planning system set up the way it is, this committee to refuse permission would have to have solid, sustainable, in the whatever, not different meaning of that word, grounds to refuse permission, because otherwise potentially it gets overturned on appeal and the council gets sued for the cost, or the taxpayer gets sued for the cost. I'm going to throw a curveball in here because not for the first time this week in this chamber, I'm sort of supporting a recommendation, but for different reasons. I think I would have to disagree with the interpretations of the definitions of grey belt. I think that's a very heavily paraphrased definition we've seen on the screen. It does, the full description of grey belt does include taking the existing quality of the land into account. And I would argue this is high quality, open countryside. It is not previously developed or poor quality land. And the other point to bear in mind is that purposes is only one element of greenbelt considerations. Openness is a really big impact on greenbelt considerations, and this doesn't get any more in terms of effect on openness. So I have to say, I don't agree with the recommendation using grey belt reasons. However, I really do fear that given the situation with this application, that it would be allowed on appeal if the council refused, because we just don't have the grounds to refuse permission, because whilst it is inappropriate development in the green belt, it has the most copper-plated, very special circumstance you could possibly imagine in the form of 38 megawatts. It doesn't get much better on the sustainability front, and that is a very strong reason to grant permission and a very weak, you're on the wrong side of the argument to refuse permission in that particular aspect. So I actually feel that the council tonight, you know, I feel the council has, I understand how the residents feel, but I feel the council's in a position where it has to grant permission. But I think, given the comment that other colleagues have said about precedent is not a material consideration in the planning system unless you're the Home Office trying to prevent hostels, hotels being turned into hostels, and that's another argument. We can't allow precedent to come into this, but if we define this as grey belt and allow it, we potentially open the door to all green belt development for housing, never mind sustainable schemes like this, which are needed. So I have real reservations about the reasons for granting permission, but at the end of the day, sadly, I feel that the council is in a position where we have to grant permission for this.
Yes, I think Councillor Anderson has very succinctly described the decision-making process for members. And Martin's presentation did indicate the second half of the grey belt definition in the MPPF, and his report does, in terms of if members feel that the application of policies relating, for example, to landscape would provide a strong reason for refusal, then members could reach the decision that this isn't grey belt. So the grey belt definition is split into two halves. I think it does feel imposed, the first half, but in this area, this village area, it doesn't impact on the purposes A, B, and D. However, second half of the definition, if members conclude that landscape, for example, would provide a strong reason for refusal, then the grey belt definition becomes excluded. The debate then turns, as Councillor Anderson has described, into a very special circumstances case, because it becomes inappropriate in the green belt, and it's a question of outweighing the benefits and the harms. I would just remind members that the tilted balance does apply, even though it's not a residential scheme. The principle still applies because we have an out-of-date local plan. So therefore, it's not a neutral balance, but the harms have to significantly, need to get the exact wording. So any adverse impacts of refusing, any adverse impacts of granting the planning permission would significantly demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So essentially, do the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits? So that's the other test for members to bear in mind. It's not just, is it a neutral or slightly harmful harm? Is it significantly and demonstrably, are the harms significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits?
So we've heard quite a lot about the harms of this, which doesn't seem to be visible, very visible from the surrounding landscape from what we've seen. There's some risk of glare, but in terms of the benefits, it's obviously the purpose of this is renewable energy production to produce 22 megawatts, enough for 8,000 homes. We should consider that not far away, well, up towards Luton, we've probably to supply our new data centres and our large number of planned housing. There's been a new gas-fired power station gone in, and every megawatt that this site generates will be a megawatt's worth of less carbon dioxide pollution being produced in this part of the world. We should also consider the great costs of putting in the there's a new data centre gone in Hemel, Hempstead with I think 64 megawatt cable which had to go all the way to Elstree. Highlights the shortage of power in this part of the world. So renewable energy, solar panels and wind and everything, they contribute to our national resilience, which is really important. When we had when the Russian invasion started, we saw volatile prices and uncertain supply of fossil fuels. Our country needs to be self-reliant as much as possible, and this is doing our bit towards that. This council declared it a climate emergency, as was mentioned, so this seems to be one of the obvious components which would mitigate that emergency. And besides the community benefit fund, having this site will be with solar panels, which, as far as I can tell, are not really noisy, and they have a large amount of biodiversity around them, animals grazing under them, and so this will actually be preserving the site, which, considering we have an obligation to build 16,000 homes over the next 16 years, would actually help to preserve that site, probably from having a large number of houses, which would if that did happen, then cause local noise and congestion and so on. So I think it will actually benefit the people living close to it as well as the broader population. So I would favour proposing to accept the officer's recommendation to delegate with a view to approval.
Thank you, Councillor Bromham. Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Guest.
Yeah, I was shocked to see how close it is to, or it would be to people's homes. I was very shocked to see that. And I am concerned about the obvious visual impact to the residences that are so near to it. Why did it have to be so close to people's homes? Is that something that could change?
That question to the officer.
Yeah.
So clearly we have to assess what comes in. I think a key issue for residents, particularly at Maple Cottages, relates to the field that was vacant from solar panels, which can be seen, bear with me, this was previously vacant following the public consultation. Now, our landscape consultant, who's worked on the local plan and provided guidance on other allocations around decorum, actually suggested that the panels were removed from this field, which is much more visible from the Chilterns AONB, over here, because as part of the landscape and visual impact assessment, residents' views, private views aren't a consideration that's given weight in the planning process. So that's the reason why those panels have been located there. It clearly changes the views for these other residents here. And there's another.
Let me stop you there. Would you please refrain and respect the members during the debate?
I respect the truth, sir.
Carry
on. So that's just regarding that change to the plan halfway through. Regarding the other properties, I do appreciate properties on Leyhill Road are close, and so is Bidds Cross Farmhouse. At the end of the day, views are going to be impacted, primarily first floor windows. As I say, there's no planning policy that would allow me as a planning officer to refuse it on the loss of a public view.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, really, it's just because we're being put in a situation more and more now of having to approve applications that perhaps we would rather not, due to legislative reasons. I think we need to be more and more aware of supporting residents to make it more acceptable to them by putting mitigations and conditions in place that would make it easier for them to swallow, because it's not something that we want to be doing. Obviously, I understand the legislative situation around it, but I think we have to be pushing back to developers more about being considerate to neighbouring residents in these cases.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't like the grey belt designation that came in the latest iteration of the NPPF, came out in late 2024. I don't like it how the grey belt is not just previously developed land, but land in the green belt that doesn't contribute strongly to preventing large areas of urban sprawl or preventing towns merging into each other. No thought to villages. I don't like it how one of the criteria is protecting the significance of historic towns, not villages. Again, no protection for villages. Unfortunately, it's the planning law that we've got to deal with. In planning law, there is no right to a view, but it is a material planning consideration that impact on landscape and visual intrusion are material planning considerations. On the other hand, this is an application for a solar farm, which the government are pushing heavily. So how much weight will be given to the fact that it's a solar farm compared with weight to visual intrusion and impact on the landscape?
Martin.
So this is, I've looked at various appeals and in terms of the weight that's being given by planning inspectors across the board. And solar panels and solar farms are generally be given substantial weight when you wrap all of the relevant benefits associated with them into one. In terms of the landscape and visual impacts, I've given that moderate. I appreciate at the beginning there's going to be more harm associated with that, but in the long term that reduces. I say on recent appeals that I've been involved with and inquiries, including one actually on the slope in the Gade Valley, the inspector gave very low weight to the harm on the valley slope, and that was for 390 homes. So obviously on the scale of this and looking at everything together, my conclusion is that this would be a moderate impact. There's a lot of landscape proposals that have been introduced and that the scheme has evolved based on the comments from the landscape officer. As we said earlier, if I could give the residential private views its own policy weight, that would have factored into this. But in terms of the limited impacts on residential amenity, in terms of noise and glare and those other elements, I've concluded that limited weight overall is concluded for residential amenity.
Councillor Guest, do you have a follow-up?
No, I don't, thank you.
Right, any further comments? Right. So, can I have a proposer to accept officer's recommendation? Councillor Bron. Do you have a seconder? I think Councillor Guest got there just before you, Councillor Madden. Right. Those in favour of officer's recommendation, please. That looks like 5. Those against? 1, 2. Two against. Abstain? 1, 2, 3. 3 plus me. 4 abstain. Okay. So, officer's recommendation has been approved with the conditions that Martin outlined as the additions to the 27 or so that were published. Right. Colleagues, shall we move on to item 5C? Martin, are you okay to go ahead?
Yep. So this application relates to the change of use of an existing agricultural stable block into residential dwellings. The application is delegated with a view to approval, subject to an appropriate assessment and the completion of the unilateral undertaking for the Children's Beechwood SAC mitigation. So just taking a look at the site location, it's an L shape. Thanks. So the application site can be seen here, north of Flamstead on Hollybush Lane. This is the application access point. Taking a look south towards Flamstead, and then turning to the left and looking north. And this is the access road. So this shows the site. You can see the existing building on the left-hand side. It's worth pointing out that this application was approved in 2021, and this is a resubmission due to the application lapsing. And this just shows the rest of the building on the site there. And then looking front on at the site. And then turning and just looking at the rest of the site there. So in terms of the proposed block plan, you can see the existing L-shaped building that's there. There is an approved barn and the foundations have been laid there. As you can see, the access point is off Hollybush Lane. There are certain conditions that have been proposed, including a refuse plan. I believe there's highways conditions as well in relation to the access road. Just taking a look at the roof plan, you can see the solar panels proposed, and there is a green sedum roof for half of the roof. And then looking at the floor plan, it's a 2-bedroom property, 2 parking spaces. So this just shows the elevations of the building that's proposed. And looking at the other elevation there. And just sections showing it all together. So the application is recommended for approval. As I said, previously approved by committee in 2021. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Right. We don't have any speakers on this one, so members, comments? No questions, no comments? Right. Shall we move to officer's recommendation? That looks like Councillor Durrant proposing. Yeah. Councillor Durrant has proposed.
Seconded.
Right, Councillor Anderson over there. Right. Moving on to item 6, appeals update.
Thank you, Chair. Just find page
223.
There we go. Thank you so much. So I'll be very brief. It's quite a short appeals update. It covers the period between the 1st and the 31st of October. The first section, appeals lodged. We can see three appeals lodged. The number of appeals Dacorum has received remains quite a bit lower than in previous years. In terms of planning appeals dismissed, the first one was an appeal at Greymantle in Bovingdon, a lawful development certificate.
Again.
Here, the argument centred around whether the second of the 2 outbuildings was reasonably necessary for purposes incidental to the enjoyment of the dwelling house. And the inspector took into account not just the size, but also the lack of detail over the uses of this outbuilding, whether those uses could actually take place within the main dwelling itself. And overall, the inspector concluded that there was insufficient assurance that the second outbuilding wasn't larger than that reasonably necessary, and therefore dismissed the appeal. There was at the end of this appeals update, there's a linked costs application submitted by the appellant, and that cost application was refused. The appellant argued essentially criticising the quality and accuracy of the case officer's report, but the inspector concluded that the officer report clearly explained in a detailed and clear, detailed, objective manner why the LDP could not be granted and considered it a reasoned judgment, and therefore that cost application was refused. The second of the allowed, the second of the dismissed appeals is relating to an agricultural building, land at Cupid Green End Lane. This is a large field that's been subdivided into a lot of plots, causing quite a big enforcement headache. In this particular application, it was an agricultural building proposed. So I suppose it's a good example that just because it's an agricultural building doesn't mean it's automatically acceptable in the countryside. You still need to consider the context of the surrounding built form, the surrounding landscape. And in this case, the inspector concluded that this agricultural building would be discordant, particularly as the agricultural building was quite small and would have limited agricultural benefits in any case. Moving on to appeals allowed. So the appeals allowed in the report was the second of the SANG appeals that we're waiting for a decision on. This was land at Netterden Road in Hotton End. And so, well, the inspectors concluded in terms of accepting the car park does have an impact, but that this would diminish over time due to landscaping. Similar arguments made in respect of fencing, that the landscaping over time would overcome any harms. The inspector concluded there would be a net benefit to the character and scenic beauty of the national landscape, no harmful intensification of harmful visitor activity to the ancient woodland, and gave significant weight to the SANG benefits in terms of countryside access, health and well-being, enabling the delivery of housing supply, and therefore concluded overall that any harms did not outweigh those benefits. In terms of the enforcement appeal situation, there is just one allowed appeal. This is a slightly unusual situation because the planning team expected the appeal to be allowed. We didn't object per se to the development, but without an enforcement notice that imposed conditions, there will be no way to control things such as access or noise. So by having an enforcement notice that was ultimately quashed, the planning inspector has granted planning permission with conditions, so it is a development that is now controlled. In terms of the statistics in 6.9, we can see that roughly 20% of appeals in decorum have been allowed. The national average is 31%, so an excellent appeals performance. Though, as members are aware, there has been an increasing concern regarding the refusals of major developments, and these there's been a series of allowed majors appeals. And according to my calculation, we are now as an authority above the 10% quality threshold. And I've discussed the costs already. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you. Just a question on the major appeals. Am I right in recalling that the main reason that those appeals are upheld our decision is overturned on appeal is because we haven't got a local plan, a live local plan? Was that the main reason why the appeals were successful for major developments?
So certainly the absence of a local plan and our housing land supply situation has made it much more harder to resist applications, and the weight given to the benefits is increased. I mean, I think I would have to analyse each appeal decision individually, because it may well be even in a more neutral balance, the inspector may have reached the same conclusion. For example, in terms of that most recent SANG application, it reads as if in a neutral balance assessment, it's still that the benefits, the harms weren't outweighing the benefits. So I think there probably would have been some cases that ticked the balance, but not all of them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Chair, the briefest of comments and a question. The brief comment is, I think seriously, and I'm not resorting to barracking, I think the Sang-Nettleton Road decision is appalling, because the inspector admits it's A&OB and then goes on to find all sorts of reasons to allow it. It's bizarre, but you can't win them all. And my other question is, could Philip provide an update at some point as what we know about what's going to happen with the planning committee's part of the planning bill legislation? I'm not too concerned about the training because we've done that forever here anyway. I'm not too concerned about the number of the committee. What I am concerned about is this threshold requiring 10 dwellings before it gets to the committee, because that is ridiculous.
Yeah, so yeah, that this relates to the proposed introduction of a national scheme of delegation. I'm not aware of any concrete proposals that have come forward arising from the consultation responses, but as soon as they do come forward, I will certainly let members aware of them.
Phil, you mentioned breaching this 10% with your mathematics. What are the implications of going over the 10%? Are we going to be placing special measures, or what happens now?
So my understanding is that authorities failing to meet any of the quality or quantity, so speed of decision-making or quality of decision-making targets would receive a letter in approximately April. And the local authorities will be given an opportunity to effectively explain themselves, because there are very often mitigating circumstances. So obviously the council would need to put its strongest foot forward in explaining in terms of what's happened since, in terms of member training, recent decision making, and in terms of officer training as well. So ultimately it would then be up to the government to decide whether to place decorum in special measures or not. If we are placed in special measures, then applicants have a choice to submit applications directly to the planning inspectorate. And as I've described previously to members, obviously that takes away local decision making, but also has financial implications because the fee entirely goes to the planning inspectorate, although decorum will still be expected to undertake all the administrative and consultation duties.
Would I be right in thinking then that we have been warned that things could get difficult if we don't, well, if we've got to stay sharp, basically? Thank you.
Thank you. Phil, you've already, you must be telepathic, you've already mentioned the point I was going to raise about training.
Well, I don't know whether Councillor Guest is simply saying that I have already mentioned it, but certainly as part of, I'm grateful for the member support that were involved in the DMC workshop. Yeah, one of the actions looking to take forward is a more formalised member training programme. It's less ad hoc, it's clearer when it's in the diary, and opportunities for members to indicate what training they feel would be useful. So to make that a more formalised and less ad hoc process.
I think that concludes the business of the evening. The Planning Enforcement Quarterly Report. Sorry about that. Thought we might have covered some of that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Hello, members. Obviously, I've met most of you, I believe, in some capacity or spoken on email. So I've taken over as the Principal Planning Enforcement Officer, taken over from Kyle. I hope you've all had the quarterly report. You've been able to have a look at that and have noted that it has changed slightly. I have condensed it a bit for you, and I also have changed the ordering, so the newer notices are at the top. I have had a suggestion to also split this by parishes, which I can do if that makes that easier for yourselves. Are there any questions out of the quarterly report? Lovely, that makes it easy. Martin, are you able to share the slides for the presentation? And it is very short, I promise. It's a separate presentation. Sorry. So this is just an example of some of the work that we have been doing. This is the Martlets in Chipperfield. It is a locally listed building. It did have planning permission to be extended and subdivided. We had quite a lot of enforcement action on this site, and we were successful in enforcing against outbuildings because Class E permitted development rights had been removed. They then decided to complete the build not in line with the approved plans, and the issue here is the dormer windows on the side elevation. This elevation is directly next to the village hall, so it is quite a prominent site in Chipperfield, and I'm sure you can see the issues with the dormers themselves. We did serve an enforcement notice. Unlike with the outbuildings, they didn't appeal this notice, and they have actually complied, and hopefully you can see the improvement on the second picture.
Out of interest, Chair, that house used to belong to a predecessor of yours, Councillor Roberts. That was, so it's not that long ago, but before he moved elsewhere, but it's interesting that it was a councillor's house, put it that way. Sorry, that was...
Okay, no problem. Next slide, Martin. So the changes from the last quarterly update, we have 86 Chipperfield Road, which is an appeal dismissed. That was a outbuilding which is being used as a separate residential dwelling. So now have until the 24th of April 2026 to comply with that notice. They are, however, looking to submit a revised application for a planning officer to consider. The land at Church Road, Little Gadsden, we've got the appeal dismissed with compliance towards the end of November. 2 Bulstrode Road Close in Chipperfield, that appeal was also dismissed. The compliance was by the 28th of August. However, they did come in with an application to vary a condition list related to a window on a side elevation. That application has been granted, which would then supersede our notice. We do just need to check compliance with that condition. Hillside View, Old Watling Street. We had the inspection, and that's the appeal that Philip mentioned in the appeals summary, where the appeal was upheld. We did serve that notice purely because we wanted the development condition. The owner would not submit, so it left us with no option but to serve an enforcement notice. Land adjacent to Beechwood Cottages in Watling Street, we've had the appeal dismissed. That's the plot opposite the White Horse, which is now being used as a car sales. So they've got until the 6th of June 2026 to comply with that notice. The Martlets, obviously, we've seen the photos, they have complied with that. And I have served a new enforcement notice on Cupid Green Lane, which I think will be keeping me very busy. Next slide, please, Martin. that just provides the notice for the details of notice for the Cuba Green Lane. They have already partially complied with that. The shipping container has been removed. The new area of fencing in question is a very small area, so we'll need to take a view on whether we are prosecuting for that or not. Next slide, Martin. And then this is just a reminder that we need any suggestions for 2026 priorities and projects. If you do have anything that is of particular interest within your ward, please send it over and we will consider any suggestions. And that is the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Caroline. Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the list, I see that some cases have been kicking around since 2015 or 2016. I'd like to make the suggestion that dealing with these long-standing cases and closing them could be a project.
Thank you. I've noted that suggestion.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I did, despite appearances, I have read this before. There's one specific address which Caroline's already aware of. I would like to be considered. Yes. In my ward. Well, actions, whatever. They've missed more deadlines than you can take a deadline out.
But it's a listed building which has been grumbling on for quite some time.
Yeah, we can certainly take that away, and I'll position with the team in terms of next steps. But in terms of priorities and projects.
Sorry, I misread what you meant.
It's as I think you're now aware of, it's not specific cases, it's kind of generalities. If in your ward you have a particular concentration or a trend of issues you feel that planning enforcement should focus on, then please let us know. Because in our local enforcement plan, as required by the MPPF, this is how we demonstrate proactive enforcement. Most of enforcement is reactive. We receive a complaint and we look at it. This is how we capacity allowing, seek to do proactive enforcement. So let us know of trends and issues in your wards, and we can consider them to be, we always have one or two priority or projects for the calendar year.
In the new town in particular, there are some quite wide grass verges, and that there can be sometimes people try to enclose those. Is that something, and it will be done progressively over decades sometimes? Start off by planting trees that spread out and then ends up with a wall around it. Is that something that would be enforced?
By my team, yes and no. So it would depend. If it's council-owned land, that would be for the estates team. We would look at it if it's a material change of use of the land. So, for example, if it is amenity land and it's been incorporated into a residential garden, so now it's become residential, we could look at the change of use. However, the difficulty we have with those is we serve notices on the landowner, which would mean serving notices potentially on ourselves or highways, rather than the onus being on the person that has created the issue. So it's not a simple yes or no answer. It's a bit of both, really. It's a yes and a no. So it would depend on the circumstances of that. But by all means, report it to us. If it's not something that we can look at, we can refer it to our estates team or onto the highways estates team if the verge is owned by highways.
And just to say that we're not asking for your immediate reaction tonight. If you do have suggestion, then please email planning.enforcement and by the end of November, and then we can consider it in December for the 2026 local enforcement plan. So please email us with anything that you would like the enforcement team to focus on.
Thanks. Can I just start off by saying a massive thank you to Caroline. Every time I've ever had to contact you about anything, you've got straight on it, got straight back to me, which is so refreshing, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'd like to just talk you, one of the number 20 on your list, Nash House. It says, without planning permission, in the material change of use of the basement to residential, but we also have a problem with another unit in that building. Unit 5, which is it's supposed to be the community space, and it was very, very hard fought for by the parish council and by me as the borough councillor. And it's supposed to be where, in it, apart from anything else, is supposed to be a big sign with the which has all been already designed with a history of the building and of Nationals of Sappy, what later became Sappy's. That particular unit has been made into a flat. It's got a full kitchen in it. I took photos years ago and sent them in. It's not even on the list, and I'd really, really like to see something done about it. This guy has taken the mickey.
Yeah, on that one, I did go out and I've been into that unit. At the time, it would have been last year, I believe it was. It was being used for physio and gym, and was being rented out, so it was still in a community use. I did look at the conditions around it, and it did still fit within that community use. I did have a long meeting with Nigel, the planning officer, as well, and the conclusion was at that time that use still benefited the community because the community could use it, could book it. Whilst when I went in, it did have a kitchen area. Obviously, you're going to need refreshment facilities. There was no bedroom, there was no furniture for it. There was a little reception desk, so it was set up for that business or community use. I mean, if that's changed since, I would need to go back and have another look. But I haven't had anything to say that it has changed since then. So yeah, on that individual unit, I'll have a look at the signage side of things for you.
Thanks. Just to explain that, Frogmore Paper Mill did all the artwork for it, and they're waiting to install a sign. And they've been waiting for years to install a sign that was provided by, historian Mike Stannion. I don't know if any of you know him. Did all the artwork for it, or did the detail for it, and it's really important to the people of Nash Mills and the parish council in Nash Mills that one tiny little bit, because originally the whole of the ground floor was supposed to be community. We lost a bit. That bit is so precious and needs to be preserved. Thank you.
Right. No further comments? In which case, we close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. And Martin, well done for a very tricky one.